Hello, and welcome back to Avenues of Awakening. Today we have a great friend of mine and special guest, Christian Bonanno, whom I've known for probably 15 years now. And originally I knew him as a dedicated Buddhist practitioner, but more recently he's evolved into a Daoist viewpoint and philosophy. I'm excited because the areas he has been researching over the last handful of years seem to me so incredibly pertinent as we investigate what does it mean to live a healthy, wholesome, and hopefully happy life, and how does that interconnect with spiritual work. And so Christian has been developing a whole cluster of interest areas that to me tie in very intimately with that question. And it's areas that I have very rarely heard discussed, and certainly never heard discussed broadly. And so we caught up with him today as he's traveling back west, making his seasonal migration back to the west. And I think he's aiming for Montana right now. So let's go talk with Christian and have a nice conversation with him. I'll see you at the end of the episode.
Hey,
Hello?
how's it going?
Good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Unbelievable.
How's my audio sound? Okay.
You sound amazing. You're really good. Yeah.
Great, great. I'm sitting in a Walmart parking lot trying to figure out my next move, but feeling much better now, though. That's for sure. It's crazy. Every time I get past the Mississippi, I immediately just start sleeping better. My body feels better.
Do you think it's like
So,
just the East Coast energetics, or do you think there's like actual 5G or other stuff going on? Because
well,
like the
I think it's a
culture.
combination. Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I don't think it has anything to do with culture at large, but so the first one, I think the biggest one is probably air pollution. And if you look at a map of the air pollution, an air pollution map of the United States, like you see a clear demarcation of air pollution, like after the Mississippi, east of the Mississippi River. Like there's just so many more. Like all the refineries down like south of the Gulf of Mexico contribute to it, but all the farming and agricultural and it's just there's just much more of it east of the Mississippi. So yeah, all that stuff blows from west to east, and then there's just a greater population on the East Coast too, which doesn't help much. But
Yeah. Were you here? Were you in the Triangle at all during the original season of COVID, like the spring, that first spring season? It was
yeah, yeah,
it was like the most. I felt like the air was like so much clearer and cleaner, and there weren't all the
yeah,
cars on the road, and it was like such a pleasant thing to walk around in springtime. I'm
I
like,
definitely, yeah,
nowadays you go, well, it's all back to normal. Probably even worse now,
yeah,
you know?
I think so. Man. But yeah, I think it's air pollution, and then the 5G too, just because it's so much more congested and
Dense.
dense. That's a better word. So I think a few nights, I stop at rest stops to sleep, and they usually are in the middle of nowhere, and I look for ones that have low 5G, so that doesn't hurt either. So, but
How do
yeah,
you find if they're low 5G?
there's an app I bought. Speaking of buying apps, that is called Coverage, and they have a free version that you could try for a few days. But the paid version, it lets you see, it lets you demarcate the different kinds of 5G. So there's like nationwide 5G and mid-band 5G, and then there's the millimeter wave 5G. Go ahead.
Can you do a quick recap of 5G? Because like partly just considering we're recording, but I don't know this stuff either. Like you told
Yeah.
me like a month ago. It's like I just thought 5G was like a 5,000. I don't know what I thought it was, like 5,000
Uh,
hertz or I don't know,
yeah,
megahertz or
yeah.
something. Like, but you told me it's like all these different frequency spectrums with different kind of impacts. So what do we got? What is 5G? What does that actually mean?
So yeah. So 5G, I think that's the biggest problem is people associate the 5G with 5 gigahertz, but it means fifth generation of fifth generation cellular technology, basically. So it actually spans a range of it starts at around 5 gigahertz, but it goes all the way up to what they call millimeter wave, which is I think it's 38 or 48 gigahertz.
Whoa.
So 5G is any wireless communication between 5G and about 5G. I'm probably getting these numbers close, but not exactly. But it doesn't really matter. But so 5G goes from around 5 gigahertz up to like 48 gigahertz.
Wow, that's a huge range. And really tiny, it sounds like.
I know. Yeah, just say 5G is kind of like
catch-all.
Sort of condenses it all, into a, because you can't say like the 5G at 48 gigahertz is the same as the 5G at 5 gigahertz, because they're two totally different things. They have two totally different powers. Say the 28 gigahertz cannot travel as far as 5 gigahertz.
Right.
So those are the towers you'll see in high density areas, like in Franklin Street and Chapel Hill. They have those towers like every 100 meters or less, and they're really high power and they carry a lot of data. So,
and then the higher the frequency, the more data you can carry. Is that something like that?
Yeah. And that's why there's such an interest. So, but there's basically a breakdown of 3 different bands that they use. And the first one is 5G. They call it 5G nationwide, and that's kind of a mix between 4G and 5G. So it kind of overlaps. But then there's 5G midband, and that's like the more middle frequency. It travels far distance, like over a mile, 2 miles, and it carries a lot more data. But then you have the 5G millimeter wave, and that's the shortest one, and that carries the most data. So 5G midband is the thing you'll see really everywhere now. And that's the one that I definitely have more issues with. Like, so if I'm in 5G nationwide, it doesn't seem to bother me as much as if I'm in a 5G midband area.
And then what about the millimeter?
The millimeter wave crushes me. I mean, we had that experience on Franklin Street. I just, shortness of breath and anxiety, and those are the 2 main things. Mainly it like triggers an anxiety or a feeling of upness and just anxiousness. So
we talked about it as like basically a stimulant. I've always felt it like, I think you're a lot more sensitive than me, but I've always felt it like almost like you're just putting yourself in a microwave, like a home microwave, and getting irradiated and just kind of stimulated up, and like it just feels like things are off somehow, just like and I get warmed up a little bit.
So the way they're looking at it affecting people is that it does act like a stimulant, or what they call something that's excitatory. When you get hit with the EMFs from 5G, it triggers a sort of chain reaction in your body. It opens up these channels we have in our body, and these channels are called voltage-gated ion channels. And so you get hit with these 5Gs, it opens those up, and when those open up, that triggers all the excitatory action on the body. So it makes calcium, potassium, and sodium enter the nerves, and when that happens in nerves, they get polarized and they get excited. And so that will give you heart palpitations, anxiety. If it's at night, you get insomnia. So it generally creates this excitatory action in the body. And this can lead to like excitotoxicity, which includes nerve damage, down the road. So, there's short-term effects that you can kind of feel, but the long-term effects can be more detrimental. So, you're right to say, it's excitatory.
I don't know how many countless, I guess, of the millimeter towers we've seen going up over in Chapel Hill. I remember it felt like in the course of 6 to 24 months, I've seen them all spring up like mushrooms. They're just all over. It's so dense now. And I personally, think that it's at least significantly correlated to my difficulty in wanting to stay there anymore at this point. It's just so like it's like a soup of radiation is how I feel.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's crazy the proliferation of 5G that started when COVID started. I mean, literally in 2019 in China. Now, I don't want to get into conspiracies here, but I think there's something really weird about those coincidences that the first, there were 5 provinces in China where they where they released 5G. And one of them was Wuhan, the whole Wuhan, but also in Shanghai and all these other places. But once COVID started, they just were like, well, seems like a good time to put it all in. Like, I don't know why there was such a proliferation of it, but it blew up. Like, I don't know if it was because people weren't out or they figured people were going to need it more because of COVID, or, I mean, I could go some more conspiratorial places with it. Like, I've been having a hard time trying to find data on how many towers they put up and how fast they put up, but just from the number of users of 5G, they must have put up. I mean, the rate of 5G growth by the user is just incredible. Although that's not a perfect kind of representation of the towers, but I want to explain too that this problem doesn't stop or start with cell phones. I think what I found out about myself. Now, I consider myself to have what they call EHS, or electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndrome. So now that just means I'm more sensitive to these things, and that's because what I think is probably genetics. So the same genetics that contribute to a mood disorder that I have also contribute to the sensitivity, and so you can get you can have EHS sensitivity not only from Wi-Fi radiation but also household electromagnetic radiation, and this comes from the wiring in your house, from your laptops. So just having your laptop plugged in and sitting on your lap, it emits a lot of these lower frequency electromagnetic radiation, and that can cause problems as well. So it really becomes difficult sometimes to kind of tease out, if you feel like you are sensitive to these things, well, where it's coming from, especially if you don't have a meter to measure these things. So
What is that? I did not know about these meters until you had purchased one. Could you share like what it is that you're using to take these measurements of these kind of different bands and stuff?
yeah, so I'm gonna grab my meter so I can read it here. All right, so I have 2 different kinds. I'll start with the household the household meter I have, and it's from a company called Gigahertz Solutions. And just so people want to look it up, the model number is ME3840B, and this measures electric and magnetic fields from 5 hertz up to 100 kilohertz. So you can see, when we're talking about Wi-Fi, even like Wi-Fi is like 2.4 gigahertz. So these are very low frequency electric and magnetic fields.
Can you help me remember that? So it's hertz, then kilo, then mega, then giga, right? And each one of those is a multiple of 1,000, right? I think that's right.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. So these are way low compared to what we were just talking about with the cell phone
For,
stuff. Okay.
yeah, kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz.
Okay.
So, this is not a toy. It's it costs $450. Electricians will use it. So uh, and so it's really reliable. So, but that's what I use to measure electric and magnetic fields. If I'm like in a house or in a hotel or something. And the other meter I have is the EMF Fields Acoustimeter AM11. And this measures radio frequency fields from 200 megahertz to 8 gigahertz. Now, I think the biggest difference between the two is that the first analyzer that measures electric and magnetic fields separately. The acoustimeter measures both electric and magnetic fields all at once. So it's measuring really the total power coming from Wi-Fi and cell towers and cell phones. But so they're a little different there because they were measuring different things, but they both have the same effect on the body.
So yeah, you were starting to get into about the low frequency stuff for households, I think, or different sensitivities, I think.
Yeah, in the household is weird because what I found from my experience and anecdotally from other people is that a high electric field will be stimulative. So if you sleep in an electric field you'll feel more anxiety, maybe more heart palpitations, but a high magnetic field will cause a depression or pain. Yeah, so this is definitely what I found for myself specifically, like, um, and I think it's because the electric field will stimulate those calcium channels to open, and the magnetic field will force them shut. It's just a theory of mine based on some things I've read. Like, I don't want, it's just a hypothesis, and it correlates with how I found myself feeling, and then measuring the fields, I see that distinction. So the trouble with the cell phone or the cell tower are the radio frequency fields. Since they're electric and magnetic fields, I think the body just doesn't know what to do with it. And so it tends to be excitatory, I think, but for other reasons, which is a long story. But I just find that, I just find that cell tower radio frequencies are more excitatory in general.
You mentioned hypothesis, and I did want to mention I've always appreciated how you uh, do your best to try to approach this, with skepticism. In fact, I think you had years of skepticism about it,
Yeah.
and we still feel that, just because it's such a big implication. But
Yeah.
how have you approached this in a way that feels like you're upholding some standards of kind of research almost?
Yeah. So to get back to how it started, I had a friend who he was a non-skeptical person. Like, he would believe anything he read, but he pointed me to some things. And this is when I first had my genetics. So I know I had some genetic issues with some calcium channels. And I started looking at, I'm like, this is kind of weird, like, these are scientists talking about these calcium ion channels being affected by these fields, and those fields are associated with bipolar those calcium channels are associated with bipolar disorder. So I was like, well, let me try something. Let me sleep with my head away from the wall. And previously this, I've been having nightmares every night, insomnia, trouble sleeping. And all I did was sleep with my feet towards the wall, and I had a good night's sleep, and I had no nightmares. And I would say that was the start of my, you know, my curiosity sort of overwhelmed my skepticism.
Totally. So I have like a similar story for me was, I think, twofold. One, when I went to the Meher Baba Center, a retreat center in
Mhm.
South Carolina that is, I won't say highly isolated, but it's in North Myrtle Beach, but they have a square mile of property. And within the
Yeah.
property where you stay, they don't have, like, at the time, especially, any Wi-Fi, very low use of electrical systems and all that kind of a thing. And I would sleep better there than anywhere else nearly. And, part of it, probably more so then at the time, I attributed to the, spiritual energy permeating the retreat center, which I do think is part of that, but which kind of brings me to the point of, like, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was an indicator. Like, I started being curious. Why did I sleep so well there? Or when I went way up to the mountains and to my aunt and uncle's cabin. And then the other time, though, that got me more tuned into it was when there's power outages at my own house in a more
Oh, yeah.
populated area. And it was like, I sleep really well those nights too. And I'm not the only one that said that. I've heard of other people saying the same thing. Just like, yeah, I
Yeah.
love it when the power goes out. It's like I sleep normally. Like how I
Yeah.
wish I could sleep every night, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. There's like little cues, and if you start questioning that, then what opens up for you then?
Yeah. That's exactly it. Like I just started saying, okay, like, like why? Like, and it was even before that. It was instances like that too that I had, where, I would go travel somewhere and I would not only feel better, but I had some skin conditions that went away. And I'm like, why does that go away? I was like, was it the water or was it this, So, and this was something I keyed onto with myself at a young age, like starting college, because I've had health problems since I was a kid. And I just noticed like different things, places I went, different things I ate. And so that kind of got me on this cue of what I'm calling more environmental illnesses. Um, and so you can have like many of these inputs coming in causing trouble. So it could be EMFs, it could be air pollution, two things that affect the body in the same way that just compound on each other. And make you not feel well. So yeah, moving up to the mountains, maybe the air is cleaner as well, so
It
you get,
is. Yeah.
yeah. So, but yeah, so I started with that, and I'm really afraid of the placebo effect. So I had to figure out ways to sort of test myself, to see if I was just bullshitting myself. So I would go to a place, and instead of measuring it right away, measuring all the fields right away, I would just see how I felt there and see how I slept. And that's when the patterns really started to emerge. I was like, wow, like, I didn't sleep here, and I take out my meter in the morning and boom, like the electric field was really high, or I slept really well and there was no electric field. So it became sort of this game of catching myself, bullshitting myself. and and like you said, it at times it became a difficult realization because it means a lot of things. I can't live where my friends live, like I just went through with you. And now that 5G, they want 5G everywhere. I mean, my world is becoming smaller and smaller. So
It's such a scary thought to me. I mean, for like the personal implications, the social implications, the like what's going to happen to humanity, you know. But why is this still a problem to talk about? You know what I mean? Like, oh, like, I can still hear plenty of people dismissing this as a offhanded kind of a thing, but and like, why is that? To me, the question then, I'd throw it back, which is like, why would you not think this would affect people? We're like 70% water, and we've just introduced in the last 20, increasingly so in the last decade or 20 years, like I don't know how big of a range of frequency, but we just said hertz, kilohertz, megahertz, and gigahertz, and they're all filled up now. Like, don't you think that might affect organic life forms? Like,
yeah,
maybe. So to me, the
and
question would be like, why would you not think it would affect us at all?
yeah, and never mind water, right? We're electric beings.
Yeah, electric. Good
We
point. Yeah.
Yeah, all these channels that control control our nervous system are controlled by, like I said, calcium, voltage gated calcium channels, voltage gated potassium channels, and voltage gated sodium channels. So, and they're voltage gated, and they've shown over and over, it is clear in the science that these channels are affected by radio frequencies. And if they weren't, they wouldn't be able to use those same things as a weapon. And now, the thing with the genetics and the individuality of people who have EHS. So yeah, like I'm more sensitive to it, but at some point, anyone is going to be affected if they're exposed to enough of it. So the people who have EHS are canaries in the coal mine with all this, and so I go into some towns, and okay, maybe there's one provider in a town providing mid-band 5G, but some towns they have four providers providing it. And so those are the towns I really get overwhelmed in. But yeah, what's going to happen when they have the millimeter wave on every 100 yards like they want to do, or less than that, every 200 feet? And there's already people protesting, like in Brooklyn, they're putting up these huge millimeter wave towers on the street, like right next to people's apartment
People's
buildings.
apartments right
And
out the window. Yeah.
yeah, they look out the window and it's right there. And so,
Do you
yeah,
remember
you
going
know,
to the tower in Chapel Hill? We looked at the little warning sticker on it and it said, do not, it was something like 18 feet or don't come within 18
yeah,
feet. And I'm like, okay, well, luckily we're 19 feet away, so we're safe now.
yeah,
That's good.
exactly. And yeah, and don't get me started on the, all the limits of the exposure that were calculated 20 years ago. Before, I mean, this was even before, this was 2G when they were talking about, okay, what's the healthy exposure for? So all the safety levels are, ancient, and they're not applicable to what we're living around today. So, but you going back, you were talking about, we don't have these frequencies in natural life, and that's true. We don't have the frequencies, the radio frequencies we're broadcasting all this stuff on. They are all human made. There is no natural earthbound or earth reaching source of these. So all those radio waves get blocked by our atmosphere if they come from outer space. And that's one of the reasons why we use those frequencies to send information, is because they don't exist on Earth. Yeah. But the other problem is that a great Greek researcher, and I forget his name, and I'll send it to you later. But he talks about the difference between man-made EMFs and natural EMFs, like from the sun. The sun releases EMFs. And so man-made EMFs are polarized, meaning that they all go in the same direction. And so you could think of it as having like a lot more synchronicity. And natural EMFs, they're unpolarized, so they're bouncing all over the place.
So
And
kind of
so,
like a laser compared to just normal reflected light kind of a thing.
yeah, a laser to a light bulb.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the best way to describe it. Yeah. So yeah, okay, a laser is just light. I say that to people, and they say, "Oh, it's just like light." Well, I can say, "Well, a laser beam is just light too," but stand in front of that for a little while and tell me that is just light. So that's it goes back to the gaslighting and the people who don't know enough about the science, or don't know that we really don't know enough about the science, which is a position I'll be in. Like, okay, I'm affected by this. I don't know what's causing it, but I know it's causing it. Like, I have no doubt now. Like,
And it's so upsetting to me that where was the public comment or the public weigh-in for all those like dozens and dozens of towers that I've just seen get put up? Like, I haven't heard a peep anywhere. It's just, it was like it was done overnight. It's the classic, like, while everyone else is debating it, just go do it. Like
not only was it done overnight, but they also passed all these laws overnight, the FCC specifically, that said you cannot a town cannot say we don't want 5G towers in our town. So it's illegal for any town in the United States to say we don't want any 5G. What they can do is some modest things, like say, like, okay, we want to review, like if you put this one near a school, like we can say, no, you can't put them near schools. But where are they putting them? They're putting them on schools and in churches. And the churches are doing it. They're both doing it because they both get money from these
get
companies
paid.
to put them in. Yeah. And so, but they're unaware of the risks, but it's just another, slow cause of death and sickness. I want to say illness of people.
Dis-ease.
Yeah. Just piling on top of all the other little ones. And so,
Yeah.
but there are things we can do. And I think this comes back to nutrition, which is one thing that helps me even when I'm in the fields, is like having the correct nutrition or overnutrition, I would say, can help sort of combat the effect that the EMFs have on our body. So these EMFs cause what's called oxidative stress, and by eating well and maybe taking some supplements, you can relieve that oxidative stress to lower down that excitatory action and to reduce the health problems. So nutrition is definitely a big part of what helps me, but it's avoiding it is the only solution.
Well, that sounds like a great time to take a pause. You know, one of the things that impresses me most about Christian's dedication is his skepticism as he comes into discovering these topics. And I certainly have come from and am still working on a very skeptical position, especially when coming to EMFs, because we don't hear much about it, at least on mainstream media coverage. And all we're interested in is the golden age of faster and faster cell phone systems, right? But I think back to the age of chemistry in the 1950s through about the 80s, where it was thought that chemistry would solve everything. And I'm very concerned and fairly convinced at this point that we are moving into the, EMF age, electromagnetic frequency age, where it's just the golden treasure trove of ever faster cell phones and ever more media which we can access at greater and greater speeds. And it is beyond inconvenient to think to allow the possibility that these things may seriously be negatively affecting us. For me personally, and I regret that during our interview yesterday, there was a couple things left off the table, one of which was a longer discussion about the low frequency magnetic radiation that he talks about coming from household wiring, shielded versus unshielded cables, and then some, of which I know very little. But there was one story that in one room in my house, when my head is facing the wall, which is the natural position of the bed, I often can't fall asleep. I feel like I've just watched too much TV for too late or had too much sugar. It's that same kind of feeling of like my head feels a little hot. The thoughts are racing a little bit. So, following Christian's advice, first of all, I did some tests and turned off certain breakers to my house to shut off what I believe is the culprit, which is the cabling for the HVAC system, which I think runs right behind the wall of my bedroom. So when I turn that off, or when I turn the master switch of the house off, I don't detect this at all, and I sleep very well. But anyway, just the other night, I just switched my sleeping position. So now my head is facing toward the center of the room at the foot of the bed. And I've done this twice now over the last week when I've felt that stimulation too strongly. And I've slept very well right after that. So I do believe these things affect us more than we let on. I also believe it is a causative agent of what I perceive as an increased agitation among people in general, just a edginess. And so I'm sure we'll circle back around to this in the conversation, but this edginess might not be a spiritual problem. Maybe partially, maybe mind practice helps, but I'm often concerned that we look in the wrong directions. So let's go to the second part of our conversation with Christian, and I think we left off with some things about the relationship of nutrition and health and well-being.
Yeah, so I really got my start in all this with something called Nutritional Genomics. It's really how you can look at someone's genetics and kind of see what kind of diet they should be focused on. and what kind of maybe supplements or nutrition that they need if they have any sort of illness. But the use of nutrition as medicine is just fascinating to me. And it's helped me. I mean, and it's helped me see where in my genetics how I'm susceptible to oxidative stress and what I can do about it. So, for example, well, the biggest one for me is zinc. Zinc really changed my life. High dose zinc, and another metal called manganese. And manganese really helps control what's called superoxide. It helps reduce superoxides. And it's funny too. Like I ask people, like, a lot of people, even who are around nutrition, I ask them, like, what do vitamins do in the body? And like, I'll ask you that. What do vitamins do in the body?
I couldn't answer that. I would speculate it is minerals that probably regulate the appropriate levels of, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't really know.
and that's it, right? I mean, and you shouldn't be, you shouldn't be ashamed of that, because I ask people who know nutrition and they don't know, and their function is to act as cofactors for enzymes. So what that means is just that they help enzymes in our body work. So an enzyme is something that turns one thing into another thing. You can think of it as a little factory, and you could think of the vitamins as little workers. And if you don't have any workers in your factory's not going to make anything. Well, if you don't have any vitamins, your enzymes are not going to make anything. So when you have a vitamin deficiency, these enzymes slow down, and that's where you have illness. And we have these pathways, and and I like to refer to this stuff from a Daoist reference, and a flow in the body. So I saw this flow coming in and out of us, but there's all these little rivers throughout our body, and if you block one of those up, or if one of them runs too fast and gets too flooded, either of these things will cause problems. So the idea of health to me is balancing this flow through the body, and you can do that through using these supplements. So these vitamins and minerals. I don't really want to say supplements, because people can confuse that with a lot of things, but and with your diet, because your diet contains these cofactors and raw materials as well. So
it's also reminding me of working out in the garden. Like, we have, the soil's too acidic, or there's not enough nitrogen. And so you amend it. Almost you could use that same word, amendments, to your diet, that could help it optimize or get better.
Yeah, just I would think that in the soil, you could look at those amendments as sort of the raw materials. So, and not really as associated with vitamins, because there are even vitamins in, so soils contain vitamins, and those vitamins do things in soil as well. So zinc is another good example of that. Zinc helps turn carbon dioxide into water and oxygen. And what that also does is it reduces the pH of the soil. So zinc stimulates this enzyme called carbonic anhydrase, and we have that in our body as well, just like the soil. And the enzyme does the same exact thing in the soil and in our body. So you can see both of, like, the soil is a living organism that has its own pathways and needs as far as vitamins and stuff, just as our body does. And
I gotcha. And so where you've gotten to is like recognizing the relationship between someone's, very most personalized genetics with their ability to absorb, or how would you say, generate vitamins, or even have certain tendencies toward deficiencies, or how would you relate those two together?
I think that the last way is the best way to put it. Tendency towards deficiencies is the first thing. So, I could look at, a group of genes and say, wow, like, it looks like this person needs more zinc or more manganese or more magnesium or whatever. But it also can relate to diet as well. Like, so how well does this person handle eating saturated fats, or do they need long chain omega-3s over short chain omega-3s? So are they a farmer type, or are they a hunter gatherer type? I think that's the biggest thing in today's culture. All these people talking about being on the paleo diet. Well, they might not. Genetically, a paleo diet might be the worst thing for them. And so we can see through genetics who a paleo diet would be more applicable to. And so as for myself, like, I had familiar hyperlipidemia, which means really high cholesterol that they didn't know where it was coming from. And for all my life, I was a vegan. And for the longest time, I was a vegan. And for a longer time, I was a vegetarian. And my cholesterol kept going up. And so it wasn't until after I saw my genetics and saw I was eating the wrong foods, and I switched to a fish-only diet, and my HDL went shooting up and my LDL went shooting down the first time in my life. So, and I did this in 3 weeks. I showed to my doctors, and they were like, "Well, I guess you don't need a statin," and they weren't impressed at all. It's like. They weren't shocked. They didn't ask me, "Wow, how did you do that?" Like, But I think, and I think that's it. I think the medical industry, if they just focused first on people's nutrition, testing their nutrition, and understanding what that means, like what having a B6 deficiency means or an iron deficiency means, and treating it properly, it would cure so many issues without the use of medications. But
that's not what they're trained for generally. Hopefully changing some.
People in medical school, they get about 1 hour of nutrition training.
I mean, that's
literally
like unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
The very fundamental substance you use to, fuel and maintain circulation of vital energies in your body, they get an hour. What hour on that?
Yeah. And the things you don't need, which are all these pharmaceutical drugs. Now, listen, I'm not knocking pharmaceutical drugs. If you need them in a pinch, they're great. But to depend on them, so my view of them is use them while you're trying to figure out what is really going on and get off of them as soon as possible. But that's not the pharmaceutical companies' thoughts on the matter. They want you to be on them as long as possible because it is more profitable. And that's the bottom line of that. So,
well, this kind of brings me to what you were talking about earlier. My father went into the neurology appointment, and his neurologist actually ruled out him having Parkinson's, which is pretty awesome.
Wow,
it does leave us a little questioning what's going on with him. But what he did find was, first of all, some of the shaking was ulnar nerve damage in his left hand,
okay.
which is interesting, which could have come from, he was on a farm for his whole life, and plenty of those pesticides and herbicides that people used to say wouldn't affect people, like Roundup. So we're wondering about that. But he also found a B12 deficiency, which you had told me 2 weeks ago is you're finding in a lot of people these days. And we looked up B12, and it is connected with fatigue. It's connected with memory problems. So we just got him going on one and are waiting to see what kind of effect that has. But he's reported feeling a little more energy in the last few days, which is pretty cool. And I was very impressed by that doctor to go out on a limb and tell him to go get a vitamin, as opposed to a $100 a pop pill, basically.
Or starting on Parkinson's drug, which they might have done, right?
Exactly.
But, you're talking about the ulnar nerve damage, but B12 deficiency is also associated with nerve damage. So the question is, too, however, do the pesticides trigger a B12 deficiency? Do they actually deplete B12 as we try to metabolize away these things? So, yeah, it's very complicated. Like, where does someone's B12 deficiency come from? Is it just diet, or is it environmental exposures that lower this B12 that causes these nerve damage? and these other symptoms of fatigue and stuff. So,
Yeah, I mean,
but
who the hell knows? Like the age of chemistry, all the herbicides we use on our crops, maybe they're like active thing that kills plants. Also, its functional method is somehow related to blocking the uptake of B12. Who the hell knows? Like how all this stuff's related. You know what I mean? Though there's like
oh
now there's
well,
a lot more people with B12 deficiency because of this
yeah,
herbicide we've been
yeah.
using. Like,
And it's funny too because B12 was probably the only um, nutritional test they will give to people with any kind of nerve pain. Like I've had it done. Like I've had uh, problems with my legs, nerve pain in my legs, and that would be the first thing they test for me. Oh, let's test it at B12, and my B12 was fine. So not all nerve damage is created by B12. There's many pathways to the problem. But even though it's the most frequently tested, it's still so rarely tested. Um, but it is probably the easiest one to get from your doctor. If you say, "Oh, I have nerve pain," and they'll say, "Oh, let's check your B12." Like, so even still, that's rare. But get them to get any like B6 or riboflavin or iron or selenium or zinc. They'll just look at you and laugh and say, "Oh, that doesn't have anything to do with anything." So, is he taking the sublingual B12 as an aside? Did you
yeah,
get that one, or is he taking?
interestingly, not
Yeah.
yet. I showed it to my mom, and she had the typical reaction of being very skeptical, and the doctor told her to get B12, but now someone else is suggesting the sublingual kind, and I don't know. I just want to stick with what the doctor said,
Yeah,
that kind of a
yeah.
thing. So I may go
I
get it
mean, but
anyway.
yeah, I would say get it anyway. Both will work, but literally, my doctor said when she was with a student doctor, and when she was testing my B12, the the student doctor said, "Do you do shots?" And she's like, "No, we just recommend the sublingual B12 because it's just as effective and it's cheaper and they don't have to come in." And you look at the studies and you'll see the sublingual methylcolin is just as good as getting the B12 shot. Like there's no difference. And the thing is, I don't understand why they didn't recommend him getting the shot if he was low in B12. But I have no doubt the adenosylcobalamin will work. It might take longer, and it just might not be the best thing. But
Like even the vitamin, I was researching some of the difference between I can't remember the like cobalt and there's two varieties I saw of B12. And one would seem like it was more like chemically synthesized or something versus another was like a bacterial reduction. So it came from organic material and had a one molecule that was swapped out with a different one or something. Kind of strange. And they're both
yeah,
called B12, it's
yeah, that's probably the more frustrating part. Like that happens with a lot of supplements. Like you could say, oh, people say, oh, I need more B6, but well, there's two different types of B6 you can take, and when you take one of them, it can cause nerve damage. So, but they just call them all B6 when there's different ways to correct the deficiency or better ways to correct the deficiency. Now, I would say your father should be eating a lot more fish because it is a good high source in B12 and um, plus other things that are good for nerves like omega-3, a long chain omega-3s, and selenium. So,
I'm writing this
I
down.
think yeah. You if anyone's ever really depleting something, yeah, supplements are great and I recommend them, but because to correct a deficiency is usually a lot more difficult than keeping a normal level. Once you get to that normal level, though, you can just stick to foods and then test every once in a while. But yeah, I mean, seafood and other and organ meats are, but seafood predominantly is high in B12. So
Good to know. Thank you.
yeah.
So I've mostly covered EMFs and the effect that can have on us, and then we got into nutrition as well, and a little bit about air pollution. And so one of the things that you and I have often talked about is like what originally I was taking as trying to find solutions of malaise and dis-ease through quote spiritual work, right? And so that's why like this is Avenues of Awakening, purportedly quote spiritual show, but I'm constantly teasing out what is meant by that at this point. And so to me, what's so funny is like people seeking solutions to their dis-ease or discomfort or bodily issues or what have you, saying, oh, I need to, trying to use a spiritual solution for what might not actually be that at all.
Yeah, so that brings me back to Taoism, because I think Taoism like accomplishes both of those aspects. So to me, being aware of the body is a spiritual practice, right? So if I'm unwell after I eat something, and I do that a couple of times and I'm unwell, well, don't eat that thing, right? It's pretty much that simple. And so, but to me, that takes a level of awareness. Like, so many people are probably affected by EMFs or their diet, and they just don't make the connection. Why? Because there's not that awareness, right? There's not that. And so that awareness of how you feel is part of the spiritual practice, but it's been a part of the spiritual practice that's been ignored. I mean, I've heard so many gurus say things like, oh, well, if you're enlightened, like nothing can hurt you. Like you'll just be well all of a sudden. And I'd say give any enlightened person a nose full of meth and see what they do. You just can't escape the human biology. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. So both the understanding how the mind works and understanding how the body works. I mean, the mind is a part of the body. So to me, like, understanding both the mind and the body is all that part of that spiritual movement.
That's exactly it. It's been so mind focused, even in a Buddhist sense, like your mind practice, your mind practice. Well, and at the same time, we say, oh, the mind and the body are one, right? Or
Yeah.
they're not separate. So wait, hang on. Shouldn't that
Yeah.
imply like we study and see what's going on with the body? And like maybe I'm so pissed off because I'm getting agitated from too much EMF stimulation or poor nutrition. And like I'm full of that yang, that fiery energy. And it's not something I'm going to sit and mind practice away, necessarily. That might help, but maybe what'll help more is, getting the right balance of nutritional items or finding a good place to cool off or whatever,
Well, I find that, the spiritual practice for me helps me cope with the environmental illnesses I've
That's
had.
a good point. Yeah.
But helping me cope from it is not doing anything to cure it. So, but helping me cope for it gives me the mind space to look into why I'm feeling unwell, and why, no matter how much I meditate, I still have issues with anxiety or insomnia. So again, meditation acts partly as a medication. But again, that medication might not be the whole solution. Now, for some people, it might be only the meditation that they need. Like, it's not outruling that, but like you said, we can't ignore the body for the mind, because the mind is the body.
And I think you're pointing at something else, which is the huge theme across all of these topics, is that it's an individualized kind of know thyself, right? So what are your genetics? What is your susceptibility to EMFs? What do you need, kind of a thing, and leaning in that direction and trying to develop that wish to know, the desire to know thyself, know thy body,
Yeah. Who am I, right? I think that's the question always, right? So I'll give you an example of, talking about individual genetics. So I didn't know for the longest time, but I have a very strong Finnish, as in Finland, heritage. And there's presumably some Inuit, or what they call the Sami in Finland. So heritage of this Inuit population who ate a lot of fish, who ate a lot of reindeer. And so me understanding that in my genetics, was really me knowing myself and what I need. And so do I, follow a Buddhist prescription of eating vegetables only? Well, yeah, you wouldn't tell an Inuit in Alaska to no, you need to eat more vegetables when they've for generations and generations grew up eating seal and whale,
Absolutely.
and they do fine. And so our genetics get changed by our heritage, and so yeah, knowing yourself, knowing your heritage, yeah, it's it's all part of it.
Indeed. I won't fully get into this either. Just sharing with you that in the last 2 days, I went to a large talk by a Buddhist monk who came through town here, and it was the first like public speaking event I've been back to since COVID, and it was really refreshing. I was like, oh, I forgot this kind of stuff can happen. It's like I used to do these all the time, and I haven't in so long, and there's like hundreds of people here. That's pretty cool. And so that was kind of a reminder of like something that was missing. Speaking of a missing nutrient, a social nutrient. And then I went to a small group meeting, which I also hadn't really done with no one that I knew except my mom was there too. So about 10 people as a caregivers support meeting. And having just a small little group talk about whatever it is, and a very important thing that everyone there is going through right now. And it was so nourishing and so refreshing, both for the content, the content area of what we're dealing with, as well as just like, oh, this kind of structure, I've missed it. I'm like, wow, it's so refreshing to get this again. It's just recognizing that there's different areas to address potentially between, as you said, the nutrition and geo energies or what have you, even social, what kind of social stuff are you getting? And so to me, it's always like, oh, is this really just a mind practice issue? Or it's like, no, I want to be around people, like that's the medicine, you know?
Oh yeah, I
uh,
agree 100%. And the difference between doing it like live in person and that or having like these online forums or Facebook or Twitter, I mean, there's no comparison, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
And then there's, of course, when do you approach the systemic side? But I don't want to get into that right now, but
yeah, well,
certainly an
yeah,
area we talk
I,
about.
yeah, definitely. And I think that's a bigger like that's such a huge question, so all the issues that I've had are caused by the systemic problems, right?
Yeah.
So the corporations that control the FDA, that control the research into nutrition, that the companies that lobby the FCC to get 5G placed everywhere, like, why isn't that considered as part of the spiritual practice? If that's
Totally.
affecting our spirituality, why isn't that? I've seen a lot of specifically Buddhists in the past sort of neglect that responsibility of, well, I'll just meditate and I'll be okay. And everyone just needs to meditate and they can keep putting up 5G and keep, creating manufactured artificial food and we'll all be okay somehow. Um, it's a delusion on its own. And I think it's escapism. And I think that's where a lot of spirituality went. Over the last like 10 or 15 years, or maybe even longer than that, actually, but
Yeah.
probably endemic in it for a while. But it's America, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, anyway, that's a whole another topic, right?
Probably so.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, I have to start to wrap up and go to my job at a certain large construction retail company based out of North Carolina. I'll tell you stories about that someday, but man, people are waking up there too, talking with my coworkers. It's very interesting. Thinking of where the profits are going and stuff like that. So
Yeah. I think we're at that point in the evolution of society, of these ebb and flow of society, where all of a sudden the people aren't profiting as much as the corporations, and so that friction starts alive. And we've been here before. It's an old story, but we always forget it. But I'm glad to hear that you're seeing that. So, well, good stuff. It was great talking to you, man.
Great talking to you too, Christian, as always. We'll keep looking for that health and well-being as well. We'll leave it at that, I suppose, for this time, and hopefully we'll be able to get Christian back on the show before too long. Maybe we can go into some of those other topics that we touched on today. So thank you again so much for listening to Avenues of Awakening. You can find links in the show notes to our website, YouTube channel, and email address, as well as to Christian's Twitter account if you want to follow up with him. So thank you for listening. Godspeed and many blessings to you. Let's do a prayer for peace, both within and in the world outside.